We ready to get started? I should turn this on. So we're gonna go ahead and get the meeting started. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Okay. All right. So thank you very much, everyone. Good to see you. Been a long time, colleagues.
It's been a long time, yeah.
And on tonight's agenda, the first thing that we're going to go to, I guess, is the roll call. Let's start there.
Furman.
Here.
Burt.
Here.
Holman.
Here.
Here.
And so the next item on our agenda is oral communications. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to speak to an item not on the agenda? No? Great. And so we'll get started on agenda item number 1. Is the Utilities Advisory Commission recommendation. The City Council adopt a resolution establishing the Palo Alto Green Gas Program using certified environmental offsets and approving 3 new gas rate schedules: residential green gas service G1G, residential master metered and commercial green gas service G2G, and large commercial green gas service G3. And would staff like to kick us off with the presentation?
Thank you very much, Chair Berman. This is an action item. My name is Valerie Fong. I'm the Utilities Director. And with me, I have Senior Resource Planner Carla Daly, who will give you an overview of our new proposed Palo Alto Green Gas Program. And we're also here to answer any questions.
Thank you. And I understand you were all up late last night, so I will try and be brief. Just as a little background, I'm sure you're all very well aware of the Palo Alto Green program that ran for a number of years and was quite successful. When Council approved the carbon neutral plan, that program became somewhat redundant, asking people to pay extra on their bills for a portfolio that was carbon neutral anyway. And so that opened up an opportunity for a new program, and that's what we're bringing to you tonight. The Palo Alto Green Gas Program is modeled after the Palo Alto Green program. It's quite similar setup. It would be like Palo Alto Green, voluntary participation with an opt-in or opt-out at any time. For residential customers, 100% of their greenhouse gas emissions due to their use of natural gas would be covered. And we would also make block purchases available to commercial customers. And commercial customers, like Palo Alto Green, are mainly interested in this for EPA green leadership and or LEED certification. And for both of those, you have to do something over and above what is offered by the standard utility offering. We have, there are lots of different choices in registries. This program, unlike Palo Alto Green, which was supplied by renewable energy credits, for gas, the product that we've come to the conclusion is most appropriate for this type of program would be carbon offsets. The Climate Action Reserve is the registry that is most commonly used for voluntary programs across the country. I'll also mention CARB, which everyone I'm sure is familiar with. The California Air Resources Board does register offset projects for compliance reasons. So for RPS compliance, those offsets would need to be CARB certified. What we're proposing tonight is not for compliance, it's a voluntary program. And I won't go through all these other possible registries. For each registry, there are many, many protocols that offset projects can fall into. Forestry and livestock are the two that are also approved protocols for CARB certified offsets. Here's just a quick table of what prices look like. The difference between livestock and forestry versus CARB guaranteed is a couple of dollars, as you can see. And again, because this is a voluntary program, we felt like there was no need to pay that extra cost for the extra verification process that happens for CARB certification. So this is our proposal. We're recommending that we do use the CAR certified offsets, but only the protocols. Ooh, there's a typo in this. Urban forestry actually should not be included in this for the first year. That's not approved by CARB yet. There's a process underway right now to get urban forestry approved, but it's actually not quite yet. So we're only recommending using protocols that are approved by CARB. So potentially, those are the exact same projects that are out there that just haven't necessarily gone through that extra verification process, which would bump the price up. And this was a discussion that happened at the UAC, and staff did modify our recommendation based on that discussion with the UAC because they were concerned about offsets being the offsets that we would purchase being basically taken off the market for somebody trying to use those for compliance. That's a positive thing that makes them kind of more environmentally beneficial. And so we are proposing not to pay the extra cost for the verification, but to buy the offsets from those projects that could potentially become compliance ready. Offset or program costs. The offset itself comes out to be about 4.8 cents per therm. And this is another change that happened between the UAC presentation in December and tonight. We originally estimated the marketing cost to be quite low, around 3 cents. Since that time, we did put out an RFP and got responses back and kind of reevaluated what it would take to get this program up and running and came to the conclusion that we really need some more money for marketing costs, at least in the first year or so. And so based on what we saw from that RFP, which we haven't picked a marketing company yet and we haven't negotiated the contract, but just based on those proposals, we think we need closer to about 7 cents in marketing initially. And so the total estimated cost per therm and the cost that's in the rate schedules before you is 12 cents per therm. And here's just a look at the bill impact at that 12 cent per therm level. You can see that in the summertime, an average customer would pay around $2 more per month on their bill, and in the winter about $6.50. And this compares to Palo Alto Green premium that was around $10 a month. So still, even at that increased marketing cost, which we do expect to go down over time, it's still a very reasonable bill impact. So our recommendation is that you recommend to council approval of the program and the associated rate schedules. That's all I have. Yeah. Oh, for the record, I had another typo on my slide. I said on slide number 3, I said non-commercial. What I meant was non-residential. Originally, it said commercial, and then I was going to change it to non-residential.
Thank you for the clarification. Is that's it? Great. So I'll open it up to colleagues for questions. And again, just to remind everybody, there is a staff recommendation here. The second item on the agenda, there's no action necessary, but this, there's a staff recommendation to approve. I'll second that. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Only to say that I know that the amount went up, but as you did your table, the amount went up, and I think probably pretty comparable. I don't remember. I remember we had a discussion. It wasn't.
Thoroughly who you should, thank you, who you should have, you know, as the, essentially as your backup, which is Carr. So, my comments.
Thank you. I'll wait until other colleagues get a chance to ask questions. Pat?
Have we done any calculations? Is it on the dollars, the premium dollars that the customer would pay, whether residential or commercial? How many dollars for ton of greenhouse gas
It's
or
about
CO2 emissions?
about $20 a ton.
And so that's what's in here, and is that about what it was on the Palo Alto Green program as well?
Jane Ratchey, Assistant Director. I don't remember if we've calculated that, and it would have changed over time as the portfolio changed, because they were substituting whatever we had in the portfolio for 100% renewable portfolio. So in the beginning of the program, it would have been more. I don't think we did that calculation.
It would be worthwhile to have that going forward, not just for the council, but for the community, because what is it that they're really getting? I mean, some members of the community simply say, I don't know, I just trust it. It seems like the right thing to do. And others would like to know, okay, what's the benefit that's coming from the dollars I'm spending when I choose to do this?
That's a good point. I think we should include that dollar per ton number in the staff report going forward. I agree.
I was, when you made the comparison to the Palo Alto Green in terms of dollars per month, about 10 average, and so when I look at the table 1 on page 6 of the staff packet, it has several different usage schedules. What's the average? I know 30 therms per month.
Right. Well, we have a summer median and a winter median. So, I mean, I guess if you assume it's somewhere in between that, it should be around
so
$4. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
That's where you get $3.60.
Correct.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting getting more bang for the buck. Offset here. Is it comparable? When we look at the impact, climate action plan. So it's not only the cost per ton. Did you also calculate what would be the impact of adoption?
Right. So you're, I think what you're recommending is that in addition to the resource impact, that in the somewhere else we have like a greenhouse, overall expected greenhouse gas reduction type impact noted in here somewhere.
Which is really
yeah.
part of
Yeah.
what we're doing.
Yeah. Yep.
I just had one other comment on that. The electric, in the Palo Alto Green Electric program, the residents were the larger participating group in terms of the percentage of the residential customers, and they're pretty small percentage of the total electric use. But for gas, they're a much bigger part. And so if the same percentage or the same customer group generally was on this program, there would be a larger fraction of greenhouse gas reduction. We can include a calculation like that if we get, and that's what we kind of hope to get, is about the same penetration, because people are familiar with this type of program and it's less expensive than the Palo Alto Green. So
at a real rough level, out of our remaining greenhouse gas, I think was somewhere around 30 or 40% coming from gas usage after
For utilities or for the city?
for the city.
I think that's about right. And then the balance was, now that we're zero on electric, it's all mobile transportation.
Mobile and then a few other sources, but yeah. And so that'll be an interesting calculation. I don't know if your friend been involved in okay, because that's where I assume that would be his orientation. What's that climate action? Gas reduction, because that say 50, you have think participation, 50% total natural gas emissions, then that's looking could be 5% of gas through this. Not a drop in the bucket.
Thank you.
Councilmember Holmes?
Yeah, a couple of three questions. The two recommended, the livestock and forestry, I didn't see that there was possibility of those being local programs or, in our region programs. So on page 7 of the staff report, it talks about gas offset programs like the Puget Sound Energy in Washington allows customers to offset the natural gas carbon footprint with, blah, blah, blah. So that's like a local program for them. So how, it goes to what Pat was saying about people knowing what they're paying for besides just the feel-good aspect of that. So is there something local that they can kind of experience or see or witness as benefit?
For the initial program, and because of the conversation that we had with the UAC and the strong preference for removing offsets that could potentially be used for compliance, we haven't included anything beyond what CARB has approved right now, although we are trying to state a preference for California projects so that at least that's as local as we feel like we can get right now. Once urban forestry is approved, that's actually something that we could do fairly locally, potentially. And
once our Palo Alto urban forestry plan is approved?
No, once CARB has approved urban forestry as a protocol. And that discussion actually happened at the UAC as well, and there were several commissioners who were very interested in the idea of probably wouldn't be urban forestry in Palo Alto, but possibly East Palo Alto, somewhere very close. That could be a project that people could actually go out and see. And so that's something that we definitely would look forward to, but definitely would not be included in the program at the start.
Actually, okay, all right. And then do we have any idea of how many communities in the Bay Area are looking at something like this? And the reason I'm asking is because how much can we have an influence potentially on projects being approved that, by CARB, so that we have more of a selection, more of a smorgasbord of what we can choose from going forward?
Well, most offset projects really are for compliance. The offsets generated by those projects are, people want to buy them for compliance, not for voluntary programs like this. And there are no other gas utilities. PG&E at one point had Climate Smart, which was a forestry type program, and for whatever reason, was not terribly successful.
Need a microphone. Okay.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, the projects that are being developed, yeah, there have been several big projects developed recently, but I don't know of other communities that are offering offsets. You know, there aren't any other gas utilities around,
Yeah.
and the
that's-
electric utilities are buying offsets for compliance.
Mhm.
Right. I mean, you can go as an individual. You can go onto the TerraBest website and buy
Mhm.
offsets to cover your own emissions for anything you do, flying across the country or
Right.
driving to work or burning natural gas or whatever.
You said PG&E's program wasn't very successful.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah. So there aren't that many communities have their own utilities. I mean, granted,
Right.
but yeah. Okay.
Karen, can I add something that
Sure.
may be of interest?
Sure.
Our staff has shared this before, but maybe you want to just refresh folks how prominent the Palo Alto Green program was nationally. I mean, I didn't appreciate it until I was
Yes.
at a conference and somebody said it was a renewable energy conference, but
It's here.
they said, "Oh, you're Palo Alto. Wow, you guys have far and away the greatest green offset program in the country. You have like triple the uptake of anyone." And I didn't even appreciate how much higher our participation
Yeah.
level was than the second best in the U.S.
Yeah, it really was a wildly successful program with the highest participation rates in the country, I think 5 years in a row.
Well, that may be something to re-emphasize when we launch this, because we kind of have this one inward perspective, and okay, we did this because our community chooses on their own, a certain percentage of our community do it. But it's also both an achievement for the community, and it actually does inspire other communities. And this goes partly to what Karen was talking about, is what impact can we leverage by doing this and having others start to consider following suit.
Right, and I think, you know, sticking with the established brand of Palo Alto Green and calling this Palo Alto Green Gas is trying to leverage off the success of the previous program. That's certainly not lost on our marketing folks, which I am not, but those people know how to sell things.
Coming from that world, I'd say it's a smart move.
Yeah.
It is in the staff report. Thank you, Pat, for bringing it up. It is in the staff report about how successful the prior program was, so appreciate that. So, yeah, anything that we can do to influence local impact or local offsets would be really great. So I guess the more successful that this will be, and I'm sure it will be, the more likely that we'll have that impact. So thank you.
Great, and I don't have any questions, but just one quick comment following up on that is I'm cautiously optimistic that the goodwill from the Palo Alto Green program will carry over to a lot of residents who had very feel-good experience. Hopefully the fairly low dollar impact, especially in comparison to and the fact that the city making it as easy as possible for our residents to have a better impact on the environment. Encourages similarly large uptake eventually, but hopefully a whole bunch of folks, I know I'll be one, check the box and sign up right away. So with that, any other questions, comments?
Just one quick comment. Any conversations that you do have, or if there's ever an opportunity, bringing up the possibility of transportation offsets would also be much appreciated. However, whenever you can have that conversation, or however, or any opportunity you have. Thank you.
Well, along a similar vein, I was thinking about either members of the community or corporation look at the business, or look at the granted this is an offset, but it's legitimate. And between our clean electricity program and this, if somebody has a plug-in hybrid be they have virtually achieved carbon neutrality. Higher life impact. What are they doing? They travel on airplanes, craft, cover about 90% of different things. So offering the community member vision how this fits into individual business aspiration to get at least that 80% reduction off 1990 level. You know, the protocol. I think those are really milestones. A lot of members of our community understand what is great, and it also moves us another step in that direction. How do we get there? The Kyoto protocols called program. Plan never really were a plan. Nobody had any idea how. And we are now actually moving closer and closer to the path. We ought to be talking about it. It's very really a whole deal conference and lay this out.
Great. So the motion on the floor is to pass the staff recommendation. All in favor? Opposed? That passes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, can we just quickly confirm that this then will go on consent when it goes to the council?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
I guess I am. The one thing is when it goes to council, it's an opportunity for the community to talk about it. So we should think about that. I'm not saying one way or another what I would advocate, but it's worth discussing with the city manager and the mayor.
In regardless, we will run press releases and whatnot, so we'll make sure there's communication with the community as well.
Yeah, very, very good point, and we should mention that. And I think that also just depends on the timing and,
Right.
and the meeting that it gets
Gotcha.
brought up at.
Okay.
But I had the same. Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Well, you do intend to start with your previous, right?
Correct.
Right, so, and is there any reason to think most of them won't come back on? Were they unhappy?
So we're bridging into another item that we're going to bring to you later this month. Yeah, in a couple of weeks, which is, the refunds that or what we're going to do with the accumulated revenues that we got from the Palo Alto Green Electric program when it was suspended. And to the extent we do any refunds, we would time it perfectly to launch this program and give the refunds so they can easily just feel comfortable putting the money
Very
to this
good.
program.
Yeah.
So we'll
A
try to be
carrot.
somewhat strategic, yeah.
Great.
Lalo's noting that you said that.
So this is the second agenda item, the preliminary electric, gas, water, and wastewater fiscal year 2015 to 2019 financial forecast and financial plan, including proposed reserve structure changes. And would staff like to kick us off with the presentation?
Yeah, so if I could introduce Senior Resource Planner John Aubenschein and Resource Planner Eric Keniston, and they'll probably flip-flop seats somewhere during the presentation. They'll give us an overview of the 4 utilities as well as seek your feedback on some proposal that we've got. This is not an action item, but we really do look forward to a robust discussion.
Great. And before you get started, let me just mention that if there's anybody in the public who wants to speak, fill out a speaker card, and we can do public comment after the presentation before council comment.
Good evening, is this on? Okay, great. Good evening, council members. So I'm here to talk to you tonight, of course, about our financial forecast for these 4 utilities. And as Val said, we're not looking for your recommendation tonight on anything, but this is a fairly sizable topic, and we're going to be coming back to you with it in April. And we wanted to give you an opportunity to ask questions. And I want to acknowledge that we had an at places item for you all today. One of the things we're hoping to do tonight is get some feedback from you on your preferences about whether or not to have a water rate increase this year. And
Sounds like a choice.
so I've given you what is a fairly hefty report. It includes a lot of information that the Utilities Advisory Commission received over the course of 2 meetings. And but what they didn't have, what we spent a lot of time with them on it, they did not have the summary report that I've given you in it, and that should have most of the information that you need to know. And so what I'm going to do, I think, is because you have the summary report, I'm going to move fairly quickly through the presentation we gave the UAC and give you the opportunity to ask questions along the way, if that's okay with, if that's an okay way to handle the. Great. So there are 2 major topics that we're going to be covering. The first is changes to the reserve structures, and then we'll talk about all of the financial forecasts for the different utilities in the context of those reserve structure changes. Those 2 topics are going to come back to you in the form of financial plans. We're going to be doing things a little bit differently this year than we have in past years. Rather than just a CMR with the financial forecast, we're going to give you a more comprehensive report. It has a lot more background information on the utilities, and we'll send that along with the budget to be adopted by resolution. And that'll be coming to you on April 15th. So I'm going to skip past slide 2, which is the summary slide here, and move on to the preliminary rate projections that we showed the UAC. Now, what you have in your packet obviously doesn't include the updated water financial forecast that we. I'm sorry. Yes, if you want to follow along, it's in the attachment. Yeah, attachment to the CMR, attachment A. So what you're seeing here on slide 3 is what we presented to the UAC. Eric, can you slide 44? This is what the updated median bill impact looks like with the rate trajectory that we put in the app places item. So if we can hop back to slide 4 now. So what I'd like to start with, I'm sorry, the slide that we just showed you, why don't we go back to that, slide 44? This is not in your packet. This is a supporting slide that we added because these are not those. What I wanted to show you was that the 4% overall bill impact that we were predicting rises to about 5% with the rate increases that you were seeing, in this at places item. Are there any other questions on this slide? Yeah, no, I'm sorry, and I'm going to do this a couple more times in the presentation, and feel free to stop me if I gloss over anything at any point. Okay, so slide 4 now. That's right, for the water utility specifically. And that'll be the.
So to be clear, we actually are going to go utility by utility, and you'll have the same conversation, but the water utility tends to be a little more complicated right now.
Okay, so first let me just talk about the proposed reserve structures changes. So we're planning to make some changes to, right now, the way that we manage our reserves, we have a single rate stabilization reserve for each of our utilities. And we have some guidelines that we follow for those, minimum and maximum guidelines. In a recent audit, which is actually December 2012, so not as recent anymore, we had a lot of suggestions from our city auditor about our management, ways to manage those reserves. And some of the changes that we're proposing here tonight are meant to be responsive to that audit. There are also changes that we believe are going to add some transparency and are going to make the reserves for each utility easier to manage. And I think the key points to know about these are that, first off, we've had extensive conversations with the Utilities Advisory Commission about it, and they are feeling very comfortable with what we're proposing. We've also talked with the city auditor about them, and the auditor's given us some preliminary thoughts that if we fully implement these, they'll, when they do their next review, they're expecting they'll be able to say that these are all consistent with their recommendations. And we've also involved ASD because the UAC had raised some questions about whether these changes might result in increases or decreases to the overall reserves for each utility, and they wanted to make sure that ASD was comfortable with whatever direction that we went. And the real core of this recommendation is that we will the rate stabilization reserve right now serves multiple purposes. Its main purpose is to be a contingency reserve, but it also sometimes is a repository for funds we're using for rate stabilization. That is, transition into to higher rates in the future, to spread rate increases across multiple years, that is, and also sometimes to hold money for future capital improvement projects. And I have some simple examples in the supporting slides of how those two functions work. But what we're proposing to do is split those functions out into multiple reserves so that we can manage what we're going to now call the operations reserve, our contingency reserve, according to some stricter minimum and maximum guidelines than we were able to put on the rate stabilization reserve in the past. That's the core of our recommendation. And ideally, in the future, ideally these other reserves, they're normally going to have zero balance. It's the operations reserve that's normally balanced. I think that's the most important thing to remember as we go through the rest of the presentation. So before I jump into the rest of the utilities, are there any questions on the reserve structure? Is anyone interested in seeing the examples or have any other discussion? Okay. Okay, so
Is it one for before? Can we do that, or?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing, differently stated. So there was the audit, which is also included here, and it would be helpful also to know what you're proposing, how it responds to the audit.
okay, yep,
And that, I think you can probably do both of those at the same time.
absolutely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let's see, which attachment did we leave the audit recommendations in? Yep. Packet page 99. I'm not working off of packet pages, unfortunately.
It has the highlights and recommendations, but it didn't include staff response. So,
thank you. Okay, so why don't I move down and I'll jump to the examples when I get to the section that they're responsive to. So first off, the recommendation was that the Utilities Department should establish formal and comprehensive policies and procedures, and that is part of where the financial plans in part came out of that. These financial plans that we're going to bring you in April are going to have the policies for management of our reserves as an attachment. And their adoption by resolution each year will allow us to review and modify them as necessary and constantly have them in front of us as staff and in front of you as policyholders. The second recommendation is I'm sorry, the financial plans are responsive to the first two recommendations. I'm on the right-hand side, yeah. And as far as revisiting the annual risk assessment model to determine, establish, and document appropriate levels of utility fund working capital, part of this was about making sure that we were looking at all of our reserves. And one thing that you're going to see as we go through this presentation is that all of our reserves are shown, not just the operations reserve, not just the rate stabilization reserve, all the reserves. We also went through an exercise of determining, again, what levels of working capital were appropriate. And that's embodied in the operations minimum, target, and maximum guidelines that you're going to see also talked about all through the presentation. You know, and as I was saying, with the fourth recommendation, where they're talking about making sure to completely state all reserves balances. Again, that's something we'll be doing in the financial plan, and it's something that you'll also see in all of our presentations as well. The capital improvement program carry forward reserves is one that we've already had signed off. We're reporting on those balances in our quarterly updates to the Utilities Advisory Commission, and you'll also see them in the financial plans as well. So, hopping to the examples, why don't we start with the CIP reserve, slide 48. You don't have this, unfortunately. This is in the supporting slides. We just added this at the last minute today. Yes. Exactly. They're just backup slides in case the question came up. So this example here, these are very simplified examples, just to get the concept across. You'll never see anything this simple, I think, happening with any of our utilities. But in this example, you have what you're seeing at the bottom are the blue bars on the bottom are operations and maintenance costs, and then the red barber poles there are commodity costs, and on the top you have capital improvement program costs. So just this very simplified breakdown of our costs. What you can see is everything's staying very steady all the way through the forecast period, except in year 4 when we have what could be it's a single year large capital project. You know, maybe we have to reline a reservoir or something along those lines, and it's unusual for our capital investment. And if we wanted to fund it all in 1 year, we'd have to have a 16% rate increase followed by a 14% rate decrease. What we can do instead, if you go to the next slide, is start what's in essence a sinking fund and have a lower rate increase, hold that over a number of years, pay for the project, and then have the decrease at the end. And this is what happens with the CIP reserve. The operations reserve stays steady over the course of the entire period. And the CIP reserve grows until, in FY 2018, we spend the money on the capital project. So it's essentially a sinking fund.
It's a very simple question. We have relined some of our reservoirs most recently, and it's just a curiosity question because of the amount of the rate increase that's in one of those scenarios. How many more reservoirs do we have that might need to be relined?
Yeah, I can give that question to Tom. Now, let me just say that rate increase was very hypothetical. It wasn't meant to relate specifically to our reservoirs. That's actually a much smaller share of our CIP spending.
People ask questions,
Oh, yeah.
so we need like to have the answers. So
absolutely,
thank you.
Yeah, Tom Marshall, Assistant Director, Utilities Engineering. We have 5 reservoirs we're still working on as part of the emergency water supply project. There's a couple that have to be lined. There's a number of them that are having seismic improvements done to them so that they'll be able to withstand earthquakes. So there's 5 reservoirs that still need work. And 2 of them have lining issues.
So can you remind me how much of that's already done or already in process?
We've
an amount of it is.
Yeah, we've completed the new reservoir, El Camino Park, and we've completed the Mayfield Reservoir, and those are the 2 largest reservoirs we have. The remainder are smaller reservoirs in the foothills, and we have not. We've done a little bit of work on Baranda, but we're not done with that, and we're going to finish that up, and then we're going to work our way up the foothills. But we have scheduling issues because we can't have them all at the same time, so it's going to take a number of years to get them all completed.
Thank you. I was thinking there was a third one that we'd already.
Well, we have 3 new wells, and we've rehabbed all of our remaining wells, and they're all back in service now. Of wells, let's see, 5, 6. I think there's 7. I think, but I'd have to count them off the top of my head. We don't. Right, and I'm sure the they have to have backflow prevention devices if they have a well on site to keep it from their water flowing back into our water district. No, we don't, but the Santa Clara Valley Water District would know because they have to be permitted to use the wells. So if we needed to know, we could find out.
I think there are.
We could find out through that, but I don't know. We'd have to.
Thank you, Karen. There were several, with your permission, that were dug in our neighborhood, I know of. And it was during the very early part of the 90s when we were in that very deep drought. And a lot of them were done at night, which seemed an unusual time to do a well.
Lower energy rates, I'm sure.
All right, bring it back to the presentation.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll give you a, if there aren't any more questions on the CIP reserve, I'll give you an example of the rate stabilization reserve. This is a situation where we have an ongoing increase in commodity costs, something that we've become familiar with certain utilities. And it's happening in FY 2017. Again, the 16% rate increase. And the goal here is to spread those rate increases across multiple years. So we're replacing them with 3 5% rate increases instead of the 1 year 16%. And this shows what happens with the rate stabilization reserve in that simple scenario. We accumulate funds in the rate stabilization reserve, spend them down in FY 17, and then revenues and costs are perfectly matched in FY 2018. So that's how that would work. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's not intuitive when you look at how the reserve works, but you see how the revenue line is above the cost line there in FY 2016, and then it's below in FY 2017, and then it matches in FY 2018. So you're adding to the reserve in 16, withdrawing from the reserve in 17, and back to completely matched in 2018.
And John, is it correct? The simple way to look at it is that the amount that's below the line is the same as the amount above.
Yes.
Go to the next slide. So there you are. But would you then? Sorry, you started. Go back to the slide.
Yeah, absolutely.
So would we then be? Would we then have a rate decrease to get back?
No, this is for an ongoing. The rate stabilization reserve would be used for an ongoing cost. Yeah, so the CIP reserve was a one-time cost, and then here we have an ongoing increase in commodity prices.
But it is a good question about CIP reserves. Would there be a rate decrease once the projects are done?
There would be. We're showing this here where we accumulate, and then we have the small decrease. And of course, in reality, inflationary increases end up eating that up, but there's no rate increase at the end. So does that help? Are there any more questions on the reserve structure? Otherwise, I'll move on to the electric utility.
Great.
Okay, so why don't we hop back to slide. You have to give me a minute here to find my place. I'm sorry. Yep, slide 5. Okay. So electric and water are our two, I think, most complicated discussions here tonight. We'll start with electric, then I'm going to move on to gas, and Eric will talk to you a bit about water and wastewater. The key points I wanted to make with respect to the electric utility is that, first off, we're expecting to see, let's see here, I'm going to skip over the overview slides here. We can just look at the cost slides. We're expecting to see increases in supply cost, purchase costs, the big blue bar up at the top. And that's related to increases in renewable costs and transmission costs over time. we are expecting 3 to 4% rate increases over the next few years to accommodate those increasing costs. But even with the 3 to 4% rate increases, we're still going to be able to maintain some of the lowest rates in California for our electric utility over that entire time. Exactly. Let's see here. One of the other things that's going on with the forecasts in here, and this is the same for all of the utilities, is this year we've moved from basing our forecasts on the budget to basing it on historical actual costs. There's typically different for every utility, but there's typically a certain amount of the budget that's just not spent. Different budgets for different reasons every year. And so these forecasts now take that into account. So that's something that's going to be present in all the utilities. The other thing that I wanted to highlight for the electric utility here was the addition of a hydro stabilization reserve. And what you're seeing here in this chart is remember I said we'd be looking at all of our reserves. Well, this is all of our reserves over the entire forecast period. And what you can see is you see the end of fiscal year 2013 all the way on the left, and then 2 bars for fiscal year 2014. The one on the left shows where we think the rate stabilization reserve and all the other reserves are going to be for the supply half of our the supply fund in our electric utility. And then the second bar shows how we plan to reallocate those rate stabilization reserves based on our new proposed reserve structure, and then what we plan to do with them over the rest of the forecast period. And you're going to see that for both the supply fund, and we also have a picture for the distribution fund as well. Now, the other chart that you're going to see pretty frequently, and I'm not going to talk about them a lot, but these charts show the operations reserve, our contingency reserve, shows the minimum, maximum, and target, and then the red line shows the level of the operations reserve over the course of the forecast period. And in all the cases, it stays very close to the target over the course of the forecast period. So, are there any questions on sort of the structure of these slides or about the electric utility generally?
While we're on the slide, it's kind of like that. If you go above.
Yes, that would be great. One of the things I didn't talk about was the unassigned reserves. And where we used to, with the rate stabilization reserves, they used to sometimes go above the maximum guidelines. With the operations reserve, that's a hard maximum. Anything that is above the maximum goes into the unassigned reserve, and in our guidelines, we are required to come back and propose a way of either designating that for a specific purpose or returning it to the ratepayers, either through rate decrease or some sort of a refunding rate mechanism.
Go ahead.
You mentioned the 3-year drought scenario. That's not here yet, right?
Yeah.
You're going to come to that.
I wanted to see if there were any questions about the reserve structure, and then I'll talk about that next.
Okay, great. Thank you. Because that's the fascinating one.
Thank you for asking about that, yeah.
Well, good. I'll wait on that aspect. Where does the calendar?
That's now called the Electric Special Projects Reserve. So it's the big old green bar there at the bottom. And I think it's worth noting with the Electric Special Projects Reserve that we do have in the guidelines, we're required to create a spending plan for that, I think, within the next year or so. Yeah.
Is there a reason for renaming that? And the reason I ask is because people who track this for a very long time are going to be interested in continuing to know what happens to it, and so renaming it may create some transparency issues.
So we renamed it a few years ago once we decided to stop. Originally, this reserve was we accumulated it because of electric industry restructuring. The idea was that this reserve would be used to pay the above market costs at the time, what were expected to be the above market costs of the Calaveras project. A few years ago, we were finding that the costs of Calaveras were no longer above market, and also there was no direct access. That was the most important thing. Restructuring was reversed after the energy crisis, for us anyway. And so what we did was we had several discussions with council and the UAC, and we converted we set out a different purpose for that reserve. It was going to be used for projects to benefit the electric ratepayers. Some things that we've talked about are, for example, funding a second transmission line, or funding the installation of smart grid technology on the distribution system. So that changed, I think, in 2000.
Yeah, just quickly, it's like, I mean, you heard Councilmember Burt also refer to it as the Calaveras Fund. So, I mean, maybe it's parenthetical, but I think, again, from a transparency perspective.
We could put a formerly in there.
Well, and that's exactly what I was thinking about. I was thinking about formerly, or could it be from? You've moved from describing
Mm-hmm. We can do that.
And if I can add to that, again, because of the historical perspective and public interest in this, I think somewhere, I'm not going to suggest where or how you do this, but even like describe, I mean, it was before I was on council, but describe, maybe there's an asterisk on your chart or something like that describes what it is and what it's being used for, as it transitioned from. Yes.
Okay. Okay. If
we know you guys don't forget this.
So do we have any other questions on these before I move on to the hydro scenario? The drought scenario?
Let's move on.
Okay, let's move on to the drought scenario then for hydro. Okay. I'm sorry, did you? Okay. So we have had some questions about the impact of drought on our electric utility. Certainly we've had a lot of discussion and questions about what's going to happen with our water utility. But since we have nearly 50%, sometimes over 50% of our electric supplies from hydroelectric sources, we also have some impacts on our electric utility. So we've run a 3-year drought scenario, and what we did was we assumed that we would get 25th percentile hydroelectric generation for 3 years straight, and that's very low generation. And what happens when that happens, we have nearly all the costs for our hydroelectric resources, our purchases from Central Valley Project and also from our Calaveras Dam, those costs are fixed. So we have to continue to pay them even when generation is low. But then on top of that, when we're not getting as much generation from those resources, we also have to go out and buy market power to replace the generation we're getting. So that clearly increases our costs. So what you're seeing in this chart, in the hash marks at the very top there, that represents the additional cost of power that we have to buy in the market. And what we do in response to that is, this is where I wrap into something I probably should have mentioned earlier when we were talking about the reserve structure, is the addition of a hydro stabilization reserve to the electric supply fund. Well, this is part of the reason for it. In the event of a drought, that provides a buffer for us. So over those 3 years, we draw down reserves and we have larger rate increases than we otherwise would have had. And what you're seeing here is what happens to those reserves. This is exactly the contingency that we have hydro reserves for. So we draw them way down. And what's important to note here is that, I mean, what might be in your, what you might be asking is, what happens if the drought continues after that third year? And what happens at that point is the stabilization reserves provided enough of a buffer that we've been able to raise rates to the point that we're just about recovering costs. So if the drought were to continue, then we'd be able to recover all of our costs through revenues. And if the drought, we didn't go out any further, but what you're seeing here, we certainly hope not to have more than a 3-year drought. We've
Drought.
well, if we were to have a scary drought like that, and this continues out beyond there, what you would see is our revenues. You see our revenues are slightly above cost. What we're doing at that point is replenishing reserves. That would simply be matching our market costs at that point. And then you see in the last year there, we end up having a rate decrease because we're no longer having these additional market power costs. That rate decrease wouldn't be there until the drought ends.
So what I would say back to that, though, is that I think you are preparing now for what could happen, which is really important. We got caught in the early 90s, and I don't think it was, she's moved out of state. I don't think it was really managed as well as perhaps you are doing it at this point. And it really became an enormous challenge for the city to handle that. And if you've looked back at that period of time, which is now a long time ago, but again, the fear of this, the fear of, obviously climate warming and so forth, really all plays into this same kind of issue. So, there's a fear factor under this. And I think, and as the rates go up because of the obvious reasons, we'll probably get pushback on that. But at the same time, I think our community is going to understand that this is a really critical time. I hope they do, at least.
One quick comment is, I was very surprised by the fact that this is a worst case scenario for years running, which would be a pretty long drought, quite a long drought for California. And all we're talking about are 2.6 and 1.7% increase. That should give comfort to the community. And, worst case scenario, we're not going to be having huge spikes in much of the economy. We'll draw it down our reserves pretty much completely, but that's.
And I think even just highlighting that even more, those 6s and 7s are increases in the 3s and 4s that were already being proposed.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's actually an even smaller increment than it seems on the chart. Are there any other questions on the hydro reserve?
Just one. So, John, if we were to see next year that this El Nino year materializes and we have an above normal rainfall, would this be readjusted at that time?
So I think that's a good question, and we have this isn't a complete proposal yet. We're going to need one thing we've talked about for the last few years is coming up with a rate adjustment mechanism for our to manage our hydro imbalances a little bit better. So we're going to be coming back with a more comprehensive proposal that we've already started working on, and that'll have some clearer formulas for when we would add to the stabilization reserve and when, whether there might be maximums for it, what the minimums might be, and how all of that might play out with a rate adjustment mechanism as well. And I think that'll be the venue where we'll have some more of those conversations. Okay, so leaving, sure. 3 years.
Did you look back through history and seriously and say over a 50-year period about the longest drought we've seen is X, and so you just made a calculated
hydro,
guess?
It was pretty representative of what, it wasn't the longest it certainly wasn't the longest over the 100-year history that we've looked at, but it was a pretty representative sample. And what we found when we did our analysis was that 3 years is about what we need in the reserves to give us the cushion to get our rates up to match for a long-term drought. And so that's the other reason to choose the 3 years. But we could show a 4 or a 5 year.
Just
that would be
curious,
helpful.
knowing, that one of the things that I have heard and read is that Australia learned and altered their entire usage habits as the result of a 10-year drought, which must have been pretty tough to go through. Not suggesting this would be a 10-year drought, but thinking we do need to change some of our habits pretty dramatically.
But if I understand it right,
Getting water at restaurants.
if you were in the third year of a drought, then you wouldn't be saying, no, we only think it's going to end after 3 years, even though there might be a different forecast. You may then, at that point in time, come with corresponding rate adjustments that would be higher as a result of being in the third year of a drought. So you're not locking yourself into saying the only thing we'll ever plan for is 3 years. That's the rolling plan, which can then be modified.
This is such a good point that Councilmember Byrd is making. So really, what we're showing you in a 5-year forecast is sort of our best guess. But next year, we're going to come back with another 5-year forecast or another 3-year forecast. And it is indeed a rolling window. And so in many respects, when it comes to the budget, we're only going to ask you to focus on the next 12-month forecast. But thank you, that was a great reminder.
No, but your rates are.
They are, but the rates can also be adjusted. That's
Right.
one of the.
But what we're trying to do now is plan. I mean, there'd be no sense in us sitting here for this length of time if you weren't trying to plan ahead and give us a warning about what could happen. So regardless of whether you're rolling it over, at the same time, you're trying to plan ahead, and that's what's commendable, and that's why we're sitting here. So.
Okay, so moving on to the gas utility. I'm just going to jump again ahead over the overview, and we'll just take a look at the revenue and cost projections. What you're seeing here are the gas utility is pretty sedate. And that's not to say that the gas industry is sedate. It's actually fairly volatile. But starting in FY13, we began passing wholesale gas costs through directly to our customers. And so while customers may see changes on, and so in order to, and our forecasts of those wholesale gas costs can change pretty dramatically. And so in order to actually highlight the changes that are happening with our capital program and our operations costs, what we're showing up here for rate increases omits the variable, the wholesale commodity. It omits the purchased gas. And essentially it holds it steady, knowing that we're going to pass those costs through to our customers over time. So if you omit the commodity portion of the gas, what we're looking at over the next few years is 3 to 4% rate increases. And that's related to changes, inflationary changes in our CIP and operating costs. There are some shifts in costs over time. You can see low CIP costs in FY14 and FY15 and higher operations costs in FY15. And I'm happy to speak to some of those things if you like. Okay, so some of that has to do with a delay, or not a delay, but we had an exceptionally large capital improvement project in FY 2013. We started back in the early 1990s, we started a program with the gas utility to replace all of the ABS plastic pipe throughout our distribution system. We, like a lot of other utilities, were having problems with that material, and we are coming to the very end of that replacement cycle. So we packaged a lot of those projects together and are finishing up that major project, and didn't have the bandwidth to complete that project and continue to add new CIP projects in the interim. So that's what's been going on in FY14 and is going to continue to happen in FY15. The increase in operations costs is related to the cross-bore program. We've been spending on that over the last few years, and we've gotten, it's a little more complicated than this, but my sense is that it's about 50% done, and in order to complete the rest of it, we worked up some very preliminary estimates. They have not been to council yet, but just some very preliminary estimates for the forecast with our engineering group, and that is included there.
So the bulk of that balance would be completed.
Well, you know, I think most likely it'll be, we're going to refine this a little bit. It's most likely going to be spread over
That's what I was wondering.
the
So
following
now
3 years.
The orange bar in 2015
Yeah.
be a little more equalized.
Yeah. Yep. But with the state of the reserves, we're comfortable that the rate increases are not going to vary too much from what you're seeing here. Are there any other questions on the gas? Okay. So then I'll turn it over to Eric, who's going to talk to you a bit about the wastewater and the water. And, you know, you've seen this at places item. We've had to sort of refine and revisit our capital improvement program projections here. And Eric will give you a little bit more background on that.
Good evening, council members. The wastewater collection utility is also, relatively speaking, sedate. It is probably here. One of the notable things about it is that we are also now proposing a rate increase in July 2015. Treatment costs are projected to go up by about 4 to 5% annually. That's the best estimate we have from them. Other cost operational going up the same, about 2 to 3%. What that equates out to is that in the long run, we're looking roughly about a 6 to 7% rate increase trajectory. Now, that said, if we come into a situation where, based on what we see in the water, for instance, if it is determined that we want to have a rate increase in the fall, or there's a drought declaration and we end up having to come back with an alternative proposal for something depending on what the SFPUC imposes upon us, we might come back also and say that we would like to do a smaller wastewater rate increase as well. Reason for this being that anytime that we do changes to water or wastewater, there is a Prop 218 noticing process that has to take place. And it'd be nice if we could sort of leverage the advantage of when we're doing that notice, we could create, say, a 3 to 4% trajectory going out for everything, and just bring all those and make that path happen as well. But again, based on recommendations from what you have, if you say nope, then we'll say no to that as well.
Just for clarification purposes, the reason for that is the wastewater fund or wastewater fee make up such a small amount that it doesn't make sense to do that on its own. But if we're doing water, there's no real additional cost.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. A 6% increase in wastewater. It's a $29 bill, so it's roughly a little bit less than $2 a month for most customers. So.
Discussing gray water, we had a bit of a discussion about it last night. Into which slot are you putting that? You don't. So if you remember last night that we started down a path of saying some cities do use their gray water. You're all looking at me like I've lost my marbles. Why don't we go to that another time?
I used to be in the planning department, and I know we occasionally had discussions about gray water, and use of gray water is, I think, something that often comes up more in a building code or planning department discussion. It doesn't end up touching us because the the water doesn't, so it touches us in the sense that that customer may reduce their water use a little bit. I know we do have some gray water systems in the city, and it doesn't end up impacting our sewer because the water doesn't end up going into the sewer. But because our residential charges are flat and identical, they're not based on directly based on consumption, it's not going to affect that person's bill. So we don't end up having to take it into consideration in our wastewater.
Okay, that was just what I wanted to know, is where does this fit into the whole scheme?
Yep, it would be essentially a water efficiency.
Good, thank you.
And showing a profile of what the reserve projections, again, we're sitting on a healthy rate stabilization reserve at this time. Part of this will be moved in operations, and the plan at this point in time is to take down that rate stabilization reserve over the next 3 years or so. That's about it for wastewater. Any questions? Yes. Okay. Good point. Also, although it's a small portion of our overall revenue profile, about 90% of our revenues come from residential customers, and those are fixed flat every month, $29 currently, $20 and $30. Commercial bills are based upon wintertime consumption. So in cases where right now we're coming in on the end of the January to March timeframe, where those bills will come in July, we'll take that average consumption, and that's what their bills will be based upon. If water usage does decrease, I can tell you in January it was higher than it was last year. February, I haven't finished crunching the numbers yet for where we were finished at, and March is still anybody's guess as to how things go. We're hoping that there's a decrease because there is a 30% reduction. But if it turns out that revenues come in lower, we might have to. Sorry about that. So revenues might end up decreasing because we end up getting less commercial revenue. Yet another reason why, if there is a drought declaration or if it looks like water usage is decreasing, we may have to come back and say we would like to do or propose something in the fall for the wastewater if we do a water rate increase as well.
I can't remember if you explained this, and it's probably obvious to all of you, but the reason you use the winter consumption, you might want to explain that.
So the reason why we use winter consumption is, again, because commercial consumption is variable. But we have, it's the best indicator of non-irrigation driven usage. So anything going into the wastewater system obviously is not going to include anything going out into lawns or shrubbery or into pavement, which will go down storm drain. So the best indicator that we have for what a commercial establishment would use that would go down the drain would be their winter-based, the low season. So without moving into actually installing wastewater meters, which are expensive and not very accurate in all cases. So, yeah. Any other questions? Again, and I could finish off operation reserve levels. We're roughly, the projected levels are right about target that's how we try to set them for the water. As you can see from your Art Places memo, let me start with that first. Things have changed a little bit from where we were at a couple of weeks ago with the UAC. We've gotten some new information on what is going on with bids for construction of new water mains. And bids have been coming in higher, and we're looking at a situation where we're betting that the cost for the newer pipe materials that we're using are just going to come in higher than what has been shown in previous forecasts and what we had projected before. So another good thing to notice about early 90s, about 93, I believe, there was a water master plan performed where they looked at the status of the mains that were in the pipes that had been in the ground for many, many years. And steel mains were starting to leak. And at that time, they developed a 25-year plan to try and get rid of all of the older leaking pipes. That program is getting ready to end right around the 2018 timeframe. So as you'd expect, we'd be looking at doing yet another water master plan to assess the condition of the pipes that we now have in the ground, see what future work needs to be done. Again, now because we've been seeing that the main replacement projects we have going on today are coming in higher than what was planned. We've said instead of doing this study maybe in 2016, let's do it in 2015. Let's go out there and do an assessment now and see how much we really need to do on an annual basis. There's always the hope that it'll come in, right about what we had before. We're conservative, so we'll bet that costs are probably, at least to finish up what we have up to 2018, 2019, the costs are probably going to be higher. But, we'll see. We're not going to bet yet that the costs are going to come in lower. We're still going to say that they come in higher. And thus, the scenarios that we have in the Places memo are superseding what we showed at the UAC. Other things to note and changes in cost, obviously wholesale water costs are projected to go up about 10% per year out through 2019 as the SFPUC's water system improvement project continues. Other costs projected to go up about 2 to 3% per year. And right now we have for 2015 a projected 10% voluntary reduction in water usage. Come April 15th, I believe, SFPUC will be announcing what they're planning on imposing on all of us as regards to whether this will continue to be a voluntary action or whether there'll be some mandatory restrictions placed upon us. After that time, we will then modify our projections and come forth to you and let you know what either needs to be done or what seems most likely to happen. So here's what we had before with a 4% rate increase trajectory. In 2013 and 2014, 2013 CIP costs were much lower than projected, so that was a nice windfall. We ended up having much higher reserves than what we planned. Starting 2014, though, we have some adjustments and we've got some additional projects that are coming online. And if we want to jump ahead to slide 40, you can see where that yellow band of CIP costs is growing faster than what we had before. And that's in the Places memo, yes. And that should be the first slide. So those 4% in the base case become a series of 6 to 7%, which is right about actually what we said last year. I believe a 7% rate trajectory is about where we had tried to forecast for last time. Now, we're not all doom and gloom, but there could be additional higher CIP costs out there. For instance, there are still projects that need to be done working up Page Mill Road, then working up to the reservoirs in that direction. And the cost of those projects, because they're in hilly terrain, because it's narrow streets and other things like that, there could be a variety of things that can be done to replace or rehabilitate those mains, but it could be something small, it could be something higher in the order of like $10 million, say, and we might need to investigate bond financing those. Some of those yellow hash bars take into account some of these additional potentialities that we see. So again, no rate increase needed for July 2014. However, we might be looking at necessity of like 8% rate increases going forward. Alternatively, if we were to do something on, come back in the fall with, say, a 4% rate increase, we could bring down that path of rate increases to something in the 5 to 6% range, or the 5 to 7% range, depending on in slide 2. Yes. So.
That's very similar to this, to water rates going up. I can't believe that throughout the valley, water rates won't go up. So I'm not sure that this is going to be a dramatic kind of thing for the community. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, everyone's going to worry about a drought, for instance. Everybody's looking at older infrastructure. We're all probably dealing with it a little bit differently. And so, as Eric noted, and Tom's here as well, Tom Marshall, Assistant Director, our approach, for instance, to infrastructure is to develop long-term plans and then to just step forward and implement those plans. We are aware that other water utilities are starting to ramp up on their CIPs. So we have seen some rate increases because of that. I'm not sure I answered your question.
Yeah, no, you answered it, but in addition to this, I would just look at it from this very macro level. When you're in a drought, people look at things quite differently than they would the rest of the time. So before, when I've been hearing about this, people have been kind of grumbling about, that's a lot of money to go into your water and so forth. But I think once you're in a drought, everyone, and you couldn't have missed it. I mean, it's on the front page of every paper that you can possibly see. It's the kind of thing that becomes more like we're all in this together, there's a hurricane coming or whatever else it may be, because now we can understand that you need to raise rates because we can see that all of California is in this situation. So that's my point, is that, terrible pun, but a rising tide does raise all boats, meaning that people will respond in a way that I think is more positive than they might have otherwise.
So I think your point is really well taken, especially with respect to drought rate schedules. If we were to ever, if for example, we heard on April 15th that we had to do a mandatory 20% reduction, we had to come back with drought rate schedules in the fall. I think there would be a lot of community understanding. The scenarios that we're showing you
Maybe
here,
a little grumbling, but
certainly, and it's certainly a lot of opinions on how to do those rate schedules in a way that respects people who
as
can
we
serve
heard last
or
night,
people.
everyone will have
Exactly.
another idea, right?
But the scenarios we're showing you here are they don't include a drought. They don't include the drought. So I think what we're asking you here is if it starts raining in March and raining heavily, where would you like to be? Where would you like to be next year, given the uncertainty in CIP that we're talking about right now? What's your feeling on what's your feeling on sensitivities in the community around water rates? I think what we're showing you here is if we were to have no rate increase this year, then we may be seeing 6 to 7% rate increases next year. If our study comes back and we find that we need to, say, accelerate main replacement, we could be seeing 8%, and we're in less of a position if we have another unexpected cost to avoid possibly double digits. So in that case, how would you feel about then instead having a 4% rate increase? What are your feelings between, say, the financial protection of a rate increase versus the rate relief, 0% rate increase? I think is what we were aiming for.
I'm interested in Pat's comments to this because you've really been involved in the water issues, Pat. Dive in, so to speak.
Less in the water supply issues.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. Jane was reminding me that there is one aspect of the drought that is included in all of these forecasts, and that's a 10% reduction in FY 2015, because we've already called for that voluntary. So we're assuming that 10%.
Good, thank you for that
I did want to
reminder.
make sure that was in there.
Thanks, great.
Yes. Well, and if we're if we did come back with a proposal for in the fall, it would miss the initial part of the summer season. I mean, so the higher use, we would miss July, August, September. It would probably be something maybe mid-September to the October timeframe is when we'd be able to come back with a rate increase proposal. So we'd miss that initial part, the first part of the irrigation season, per se, and we'd end up making that up.
Tearing out my lawn anyway, no matter what.
Yes, it'd be gentle.
Okay, thanks.
John, I'll start with where you left off on the anticipated 10% vote. And first, I think we really want to make our community aware because we participate in education. We are not going to manage, or at least none are anticipated. But we are going to have a 10% voluntary. And that's a benefit of being in the Hetch-Hetchy system, higher quality water, but also now recognizing higher reliability. Because not only the nature of the system, but the changes in water management policy that we spoke 20 years ago now, that long ago, to not waste the water in a drought. What happened? And we now will benefit. And as Liz had mentioned, that in the midst of a drought, the psychology of water use changes. And it changes toward everybody appreciating more precious water. And that probably translates in a number of different ways. How the users will respond to different areas. But let me return to the impact of the 10% anticipated reduction, because that means that look at the blue bar, the water supply goes down, but its percentage of the total is also diminished, and so we have a higher percentage fixed cost and or other costs. And so then we have a scenario where the price per gallon will go up as the gallon used goes down. This is something that I've talked about repeatedly for years. Don't communicate well. I really want to see this route, which is we provide two areas. One is what it's going to cost per gallon. What the average household, if say we look out at 2014, we're a little over 50%, or a little under 50% of our cost. So if we go to 10% down, that's 10%, 40% total, 4%. Offset the rate increase. If we look back, we saw last over a 50-year period, we have had about 40% reduction in tap water. Still quite high, but within Palo Alto for 15 years, if I recall correctly, about a 40% reduction. That's not chicken. It's a lot of reduction. I'm buying a lot of water did 15 years. Hey, for us. Hey, yeah, we don't see that. So my water might be our price per gallon a lot. Water we don't tell that. It's actually and we're subsidizing to a great degree those reductions. I get the incentive
If I could, just in defense of our communications manager who has a family emergency, is not able to be here, she has taken to heart what you have said on this very matter, and she has really pushed a campaign to make the point that you're making, which is prices might go up, but conserve, because your bill could still go down, or it doesn't necessarily go up because you're buying fewer units. But we'll continue to work on that.
I'll give the example. Full presentation.
Yeah.
You're thinking bureaucratic. You're thinking you're about cost. We're thinking
We appreciate that, and we'll definitely work on that. And had she been here, she would have caught that, but she hasn't been able to be here.
Because it was the biggest issue during the last drought. People have a terrible time understanding why does this cost more, but I'm using less, and we're collecting it in the shower and carrying it outdoors, and people really became incensed about how could this happen to them. So I think there were lessons learned in that last drought in the early part of the 90s that certainly have improved things now. But I think this concentration on what does it mean to you individually is really important. And, even though we're all in this together, there will still be those who say, as we heard somebody last night say, well, we're not quite sure that you're allocating this properly. And that's a tough one to deal with. So for that person who is missing, then I think that's the hardest thing to explain. This is how we are actually going to operate it, and we know you may have some different ideas, but this is what is currently in place.
I have two other issues I want to bring up. One, you mentioned within our water line replacement and even within our reservoirs, the hills. And we've heard at different times in recent years reference to our costs of supplying water in the hills versus our costs of supplying it in flatland. But we only have one rate. And I think we had touched on this previously, but we really haven't gotten into a policy discussion on under Prop 218. Could we and should we consider charging rates in proportion to the cost of delivery in different areas? We talk about, we have different tiers.
So I know that we took a look at this at in our last cost of service study, and we found that there were because, and if I remember right, it had a lot to do with the fact that we have reservoirs up there that maintain pressure and fire flows and other system benefits for the system as a whole. The rate consultant didn't see a justification for allocating out a specific rate to those customers in the hills.
Well, I remember some discussion. I guess I would be interested in revisiting that, especially when you're looking at including what may be a disproportionate increase or portion of your increase in the capital improvements that may be attributable for that as well. So the consultant may have been looking backward and may have a different interpretation as we look forward.
Okay, and I know Jane wanted to, but I just wanted to throw one thing in there, that a lot of the increase that we're looking at there is associated with accelerated main replacement rather than the page mill pipeline, but that is an issue.
Well, my point would be that as we move up, and this may include even if it's page mill and if it's the research park, if we've had costs that were long sunk, and now we're having to relook at them and replace, if we have to replace mains everywhere, and we come out and find, well, is it just coincidental that it's right now this one, or is that a higher cost because as you move up, you have fewer customers to spread that, and now is what was really an inherent disproportionate cost that we weren't recognizing because we weren't yet having to replace those pipelines. Now it becomes more apparent. And I don't know the answer to that, but I want to make sure we're considering it.
Yeah, Tom Marshall again. Just a quick comment about the foothills and the system up there. Most of that system up there is for water storage, and it's used in fire protection of the entire system. So the cost of the reservoirs and the pipeline is wouldn't be allocated to just those customers because it's actually providing fire protection throughout the city. So they are common costs to all the water customers, and they all get benefit from the system in the foothill.
Okay, I hear you, and I just would be interested in relooking at that at some future time, not tonight. So finally, we had an agenda item that was supposed to have been scheduled previously and didn't, and I'm surprised it didn't come up under tonight's related issues, which is around reevaluating why our rates are higher than other Hetchy customers, and that's the critical comparison. So that didn't come back tonight, and I guess I don't know why.
So we actually had a sort of preliminary discussion with the Utilities Advisory Commission in January, and they recommended that we spend more time. They recommended some other avenues for research, and that we do a little more analysis before we come back to you. Now, what we're going to do actually is come to you on April 15th, and we're going to bring you the previous benchmarking study. Also, I'm hoping that the SAIC study will be available in public at that time. Right, the utility organizational study, right. No, that's sort of shorthand. And that has some more benchmarks that I think you'll find interesting, because we did do this effort back in 2010. So what I want to do is start by reviewing that and then talk to you a little bit about some of the analysis that we did, and then talk about what we're going to be looking at next and get your feedback on whether that's answering some of the questions that you'd had in the last budget season.
Thank you.
Yes, and then I'm gonna.
How are you going to make sure people read that? What's the
I think that's. I wish we had our communications manager here tonight, because she has a whole set of outreach.
I wonder if voluntarily. I know I started sort of down
in that last paper listing a lot of water usage. So
Oh, did it? So it's almost public shaming.
yes, it was
Yeah.
a lot of it.
So I want to bring us back to the discussion about what should we do? Should we keep the current water rate? What do we recommend, or what do we think? 0% have the softer the rates. I'll give.
Yeah, you actually, so we're looking for feedback, and you don't actually, you don't have to vote or anything, but, and we've gotten some really great feedback. And in any event, we do promise to come back once we know a little bit more after the April 15th, particularly if there's a change. After April 15th, we would be back with some way to address any real mandatory drought impacts.
And my little piece of feedback is it's very helpful that we were projecting at 0% this year. It makes it a lot easier to tack on 4% versus we already had 4% projected. So I think it's a good situation to stomach a small but kind of level up.
It may also be that the way we're not talking about this right either. I mean, last year we projected we'd be doing a 7% rate increase this year, and now we're talking about either a 0 or a 4, and I think that's a much better situation than we were in last year.
Setting the bar real low. Easy to jump over high. But no, that's absolutely right. So, does that? I don't want to interrupt the presentation now. In the presentation.
Essentially, that would conclude it. I mean, we would have a similar look on the reserve projections would show pretty much what we've seen before. If I go back to slide 34. You could see how we have quite a bit of rate stabilization reserve that we can use. We're planning on placing, I think, roughly about as a preparatory measure for CIP projects that we feel are coming up and that we see coming up in the next 2 years or so. Placing about $5.5 million, I think, is our estimate at this point in time. We're still fleshing out exactly how much we'll put in there, but that's the point of the CIP reserve is to take when we feel that we're going to have these projects that we know are coming down the line that were higher than what we had, place some of those funds in there, and then use the rate stabilization and bring that down over time. So, yes, and then it should note that these reserve projections are under the old 4% scenario. They'd be exhausted much faster under a higher rate change, but.
Were there any other overarching questions about the project as a whole?
Chair Berman, I just wanted to acknowledge the Utilities Department staff for listening to some of you and for your colleagues that were in the Finance Committee previously, because there was a lot of discussion about the minimums and maximums and why were the reserves going up and down. And I think this illustrates to you that it's a lot easier to comprehend why certain reserves why is the reserve moving and what within the components of the reserves are the factors that are driving it. And the other piece that I think that I want to commend them on too is adjusting for actual trend rather than a budget trend, especially on the capital program, that those dollars can fluctuate considerably if you have a major project because you have pre-design, design, and construction. And so they're aligning for that. So I just wanted to make sure that they receive praise for their work.
Very good point. Karen?
Yeah, you guys can tell us, not now, but later, if the presentation, I think, is very good, and see if the slide presentation can be a little more inclusive of information. For instance, if there are CIP projects that you're anticipating, can you include those on the slide? I mean, so in other words, that these are kind of self-contained units, anywhere you can on a slide. It's not going to be absolute because some of those things change, but where you can indicate what the project you might anticipate.
Okay,
I mean, that's one for instance.
I think the next time when you come through with the full-blown financial forecast, you'll include all the CIPs and everything else. It won't fit on a slide, but it'll make your packet really thick, but we'll try to give you a lot more info.
Well, what I was hoping was that there could just be like a small list, like an asterisk, a little list of what the potential CIPs are. It might not be all conclusive. Well, I say you guys can determine that. I can't tell you absolutely, but I just think as we're looking at this, it's going to make it clearer for the public and for us to digest. Any information that you can include on the slide itself, it would be great and helpful. The other thing is like totally off the conversation that we've been having, but a frustration that I know others have too, but certainly I do and have commented on before. I want to compliment you because with few exceptions, the presentation that you provided here in black and white reads. And so many, Pat knows what I'm talking about. So many. I know it's a big deal to Karen. It is. We get. She's right. Well, we get staff reports where things are printed out in black and white, and you can't tell the difference between rate stabilization and a CIP because there's no differentiation in how the color converts to black and white, or they don't utilize screens and patterns and that sort of thing. And with few exceptions, you were very successful in that, and I appreciate that very much. So. It's easier to read a chart than to read mud, let's say, since we're talking water. So
I just did want to comment that, I mean, I do think that, the the way this is done now does add a lot of clarity and transparency, the process to the different utility reserves. And so I think it's a great improvement that's happening. It's quite easy to follow. So I think that.
Just underscore what Pat Burt said, which is personalize it wherever you can, and get a sense of where is the water use. And believe me, if the press ever gets a hold of this, and and it goes deeply into a drought, it's a great front page story.
Last thing, I think there was one comment that, John, you made earlier about and I've forgotten what the numbers were because I can't remember what slide it was even on, but the percentage increase was actually smaller because it was an increase on the other increase. I can't remember, those kinds of asterisks to make it clear so it doesn't translate to the public. It's like, oh, it's this percentage of an increase. And it helps us too. So we're trying to communicate with the public as best as we can, not just as council members, but as staff, you are. So it helps us work through all of this, and also helps the media as they report it. It provides a lot of clarity and, in that way, transparency. So anywhere you can try to accomplish those kinds of things, it's great.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're saying is where a slide is complex and trying to deliver one or two very specific noteworthy things you'd like to see them noted.
Absolutely.
As opposed to just verbalized.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd work.
Great. Thank you guys very much. I think that almost wraps up this item. It does wrap up this item.
Getting ready for your next item.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks very much.
So the next item is
Actually, it's kind of fun stuff.
future meetings and agendas.
Well, I grew up in a place where I can remember just saying to my mother, "Why are you worrying about water? It's free." and I grew up with water tanks and things like that, and the cost of water was so low.
All right.
Your next meeting is
All gone.
Tuesday, March 18th. We have 4 items on the tentative agenda right now. One of them being the mid-year budget. We have some adjustments that we're recommending to you both on the expenditure and the revenue side. We are also bringing to you, as John had mentioned, the Utilities Department Organizational Assessment. It's quite a large document, so I'm trying to get it out to you early because that way you'll have a little bit more time to digest it. It does have an executive summary and some tables, so we're trying to summarize that in a staff report. What we might do if we packet it early, we would not attach the staff report in order to get it out to you. So, if you see it that way, that was the purpose. That was the reason, sorry. We would also bring to you the local solar plan and initiatives. They went through the UAC and the disposition of accumulative Palo to green revenues, as you heard earlier tonight. There is no meeting on April 1st.
That joke?
Well, do we think, it sounds like that's a lot that we've got on the 18th. We think that's a manageable amount?
Thank you, Chair Berman, for reminding me. We had polled you at the last Finance Committee meeting, and you were okay to start at 6:30. We'll double check. I believe at this point that it's doable. We don't have any major changes in the mid-year. You're aware of the Palo to green revenue, and you heard that we want to use that as an incentive for the green gas now. So I think we could do it. It's a matter of the utility org study. That's the one that you may decide that you want to hear, and then continue that discussion. And maybe that's the way to handle it.
Okay, we can see how this will be.
Yeah. Then the meeting after that is the 15th of April, and it's.
That was not a joke. That was.
This one seems a little packed, but it's you're getting the primer today, so it's setting the table for the discussion. We'll have the CDBG funding, the HISRAP, and most of those are pretty much aligned and set. So, but you'll still have an opportunity to discuss those. Proposed electric, gas, wastewater, water financial plans. So the continuation of the discussion. As John mentioned, the water utility benchmark study, and then the rate adjustment for the storm drain is typically just a CPI. So that item is typically not a long discussion.
Okay.
Then, sure, please.
So, having been on policy and services before and having been a liaison to the HRC before and now on finance, it's always a question for me whether the better place for the HISRAP funding is at policy and services or at finance. And the reason I raise that question is because I'm somebody who happens to believe that how we spend our money should be a reflection of our values, our policies, as opposed to how we spend our money determining, just the opposite, what our policies and values are. So it's always a question. I mean, I don't know if you've thought about that, or if the Finance Committee's had much of a discussion about that, but, it's maybe you've been on finance for a while. You want to answer that?
Well, I think if I recall correctly, we did raise that question ourselves in the last year or two as we looked at this, and while we thought that was a valid question, what we did last year was to drive through the Finance Committee some increases, and we felt that yes, these were basically policy decisions that were being made through the Finance Committee, and that's the way it was structured. But I think there was some consensus that it was worth reevaluating how we would do this.
And the commission, as you may recall, did an extensive amount of work on policy and brought it to the Finance Committee as well. So there was, from my perspective, there was an element of both in that process, because there was policy, even though it was not P&S, there was a commission.
So I guess I'm not quite clear based on both of your comments. It's like, is the appropriate place finance or is the appropriate place policy and services? I mean, has there been a...
So I think that's policy discussion.
Ironically enough.
And so, under how we do things, in theory, that would need to have the council ask the Policy and Services Committee to consider that. I think that's how we would address it, and I think it's worth talking about.
And maybe not to digress too far here, but maybe also there's some way to roll into this. The conversation that we had last week about how, it was about staff go passes and how we think about those monies. It's a broader question, but how we think about those monies or any number of other monies that we're thinking of spending. Think about those in terms of like, well, as a part of this pie, it's not very big. As for what we're getting, it's not very much. But I guess the comment that I made then was like, but if you think of $10,000 in terms of HISRAP funding and how much that could make a difference in that pocket. So it's a much broader conversation, but I just wanted to bring it up because we're talking about HISRAP funding.
Really quick, May 6th would be the following meeting of that, and we have on the tentative schedule from the city auditor's office, the audit solid waste program. That's the refuse fund, the billing for refuse, and then the fire department, the review of the cost recovery levels of the emergency medical services or EMS fees. And lastly, to close, I know we send it to you via email. Well, we got to work with the consultant. He's got to determine, Councilmember Burt's referring to the development impact fees, is my assumption. And we have not forgotten. I asked the consultant if we could come back on May 6th, and he's trying to analyze that and see if he can do so. So I had not forgotten. These are the meetings for the budget. I know we emailed them to you, but this might be of help if
That would be very helpful. Thank
I
you.
hand them to you.
Just trying to jot those in here as you were talking.
And I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Great. Thank you, Lalo. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
So 13, 15, 20, and 22, correct?
Correct.
And 29. And 29.
29 is the wrap up, right? And we can talk about that process.
You want to go back to policy and services?
Just kind of.
I was just thinking, yes, a nice idea. Yeah, right. Well, I love policy because it's so.
Well, I do too. I'm a policy
Either
wonk.
It just
meeting
has
before or
more
set the first meeting.
stuff to it that's
Whatever.
it's so much more subjective. This stuff is just
on the email that's,
Well,
no, he didn't.
There's a lot of policy in this, too.
There's a lot, but there's an awful lot that's just, it's just buckets of money that get moved from here to there.